forgetting all the formalities, nerves. Fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests. This evening, I'm pleasured to share with you a passion of mine. Birthdays! No, it's not. I love birthdays, but it's rivers. Tonight I will touch on a couple of journeys that will give you insight into what I hope will inspire you to see that a river expedition is one adventure that will offer much excitement and personal challenge that few will be hard to meet. It will rekindle that intrinsic need for adventure and connection with the natural environment. It's not all about nail-biting, extreme, petrifying stuff either. It's a way of life, a chance to uncover a unique part of a country and culture that few will get a chance to experience. Following that, I will touch on what immediate threats are facing some of the great rivers of the world and the detriment this is having. Finally, we'll sum up with what steps you can take that'll make the next adventure of yours a river trip, and how we can all take an active interest in preserving them. So how did it all start? Well, initially for me, it wasn't all about that knuckle whitening, heart-stopping white water that was to be the catalyst for wanting to explore the less trodden corners of the world. That's still part of the drive, but it has evolved to be much more than that. It all started back in New Zealand when I met travellers, and they had come here in search of some of the most secluded, stunning rivers that cascade from our mountains. They had stories, photos, an insatiable desire and appetite to keep challenging themselves and exploring new waterways of the world. The decision was made for me. Study was on hold for another year. Travel and whitewater exploration was on. Looking back, I was a bit naive. Actually, I was very naive. I headed to Nepal with my kayak as my checked-in luggage. Only enough money for a one-way ticket to Kathmandu, as I figured after a few months I'd work out a way to get a flight back to Bangkok. I had stories that if you arrive, kayak in hand, a bit of experience, you could pick up work as a safety kayaker on river expeditions. Many thought I was mad, including my family, but sometimes you can't convince people why you have to do something. You just have to do it. And looking back, what this naivety and sense for adventure can open to us is experiences beyond what we ever initially imagine. And only happens when you take a few risks and not always have a pre-planned agenda. Shock, extreme highs and lows, but 3 months working in the Himalayas, making friends with the Nepalese, and getting immersed into a culture that couldn't have been further away from my Southland upbringing. This was real living. This is sustenance for the soul. Over the years, I've seen the positive, and that almost everyone that gets the experience of being immersed and in and around rivers will also learn to appreciate and marvel at a river's power. They are the lifeblood. You might be wondering though, why is this trigger so important to appreciate and to share this passion for our rivers? It's so important because fresh water will be the most vital and scarce resource of the future. There are still many disputable climate debates going on, including global warming itself. But with the rapid demise of free-flowing rivers and the global shortage of clean water, this is one environmental emergency that is irrefutable. It threatens the health of millions of people, wildlife and ecosystems, and the livelihood of those that depend on them. This is one resource no nation can live without. Even the Premier of China exclaimed in a recent speech that the shortage of clean water threatens the survival of the Chinese nation. Factories, farms, irrigation and cities suck rivers dry and pollute them to the point that they can't even be lived near. But there's one other man-made threat to the world's free-flowing rivers, and the millions that depend on them. The rapid expanse of ill-conceived dams. One country that has seen a phenomenal increase in dam projects is Ethiopia. Now, I don't know if you guys know much about Ethiopia. I have to admit, I didn't know a lot about it a year ago, but it's a huge country. It's twice as big as France, and it's still a very poor country. Okay. It's North Africa there, and it borders with Kenya and Sudan. Okay. And they've had a rapid, as I said, a rapid increase in its hydro dam construction. I spent nearly 3 weeks there last Christmas, and high on my priority was exploring and getting to know the tribes people in the South Omo Valley, which is the Omo River down here near the border. The tribes that live along the southern Omo River have been defiantly living like this for centuries. They basically still live outside the Ethiopian government rule, with tribal disputes and resolutions still done as it has been for hundreds of years. This was no easy trip to plan and execute. The Lower Omo is in a white water trip, and to organise it involved arranging the boat owner 2 days driveway to tow one down for us. The Ono Valley is only accessible by 4-wheel drive vehicle, and even to get near and on the river is an undertaking in itself. We felt humbled by what was to see and experience. For 3 days, we explored our way down the Lower Omo River that eventually meets with Sudan and flows into Lake Turkana in northern Kenya. During this time, we visited and passed distinctly different tribes. We watched them harvesting their crops on the steep banks of the Omo River, as they had done for hundreds of years. The Omo River floods heavily, and when the waters retreat, the soil of the banks of the river are left very highly fertile. The tribes and the way of life for people along the banks of the Omo is unique to nowhere else on earth. One of the largest projects, the Jib 3, which construction is underway, is currently on hold due to funding constraints. This would be Africa's second largest hydroelectric dam, and many though are claiming it as the most destructive. Survival International and International Rivers are two organisations that globally work to promote and voice the human environmental impact of dam construction on those most affected and able to protest themselves. The impact of this would threaten over 200,000 people from 8 tribes on the Lower Omo River, and also 300,000 people that live on the banks of Lake Turkana in Kenya. They would lose their way of life. This project will condemn 500,000 people of the regions most vulnerable to hunger and conflict, and a way of life that once lost will be gone forever. These dams are part of the country's strategy to capitalise on its topography to generate electricity as its next major export to meet its current demand for power. There is no disputing Ethiopia does need to increase its electricity capacity. The problem is the dams already under construction and built on the Blue Nile and the 2 dams built on the Upper Omo will meet these needs. To further extend these projects at a huge cost to those in the Lower Omo show that tribal people, they get ignored and they get sidelined for the interest of government, industry and multinationals that fund these projects. This dam will end the river's natural flood cycle, which herders and farmers have relied on for centuries. So I ask you, if this project had the same detrimental impact on this many people in the UK, would it be allowed to proceed? And it's not just in Ethiopia, it's in Brazil, it's in Malaysia and Peru. The tribes and indigenous people will lose their homes and their only way of life if these mega dam constructions proceed. So you might think, what can we do? It's hard. To start, go on to Survival International and International Rivers and sign the petition if you feel the extent of these projects need to be halted or majorly remodelled. And take an interest in our free-running rivers and why it's so important to protect them and keep them clean. They are the lifeblood of every country, here and abroad. And finally, I ask one thing. Do seriously consider a river expedition. It can be done solo, it can be done as a family, whitewater, multi-day, by raft, canoe, by Felicia. Consider a country you might not have previously contemplated visiting. I went to Zambia, Slovenia, Ethiopia, initially because of the draw of the rivers, but came to discover much more about these countries and its people. My next destination is Georgia. So far, off the beaten track for many, but still a virtually untouched river in the Caucasus Mountains. And although it won't be in the next year, you always have to have that next trip brewing in the back of your mind. Thank you all.